Tada. Matt, good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Boker Tov, pleasure to be here. Am I on? Can you hear me now? There we go. It's a pleasure to be here, though I don't really appreciate the kind words when you started off because it's a crisis of rising expectations. Now people expect something smart.
I'm sure they won't be disappointed. Let me start right to the point. What is Hezbollah after the summer of 2024?
So it's actually a more complicated question than some might think, because obviously Hezbollah has been kicked in the shins operationally. It's really a fraction of what it was in ways that most all Hezbollah watchers, including myself, could never have anticipated. But the way I like to describe it is that Israeli security and military forces significantly degraded the two big baskets of threats that Hezbollah posed to Israel. Namely, significant damage to the rocket arsenal, numbers, and also the most dangerous precision-guided munitions, and then also the forward-deployed weapons, personnel, and bunkers and tunnels. But Hezbollah still has thousands of fighters. They still have thousands of small arms. They can still do tremendous amounts of influence and danger in Lebanon itself. And I think in particular, when we zero in on the money, I think some people have gotten a little too excited about the extent of damage done to Hezbollah. There was financial damage done to Hezbollah, but not as much, I fear, as many people suggest.
So with Iran, let's say, suffering certain damages, Syria changing hands, and especially the airports and the ability to land cash, etc. Qad al-Hassan, let's say, effectively disconnected from the Lebanese system after the kinetic hits, etc., disconnected from the Lebanese system. So those are, let's say, negatives. But on the flip side, what seems to be a still fairly robust, let's say, criminal terrorist nexus outside of the Middle East. How is that affecting the budget and the flow of funds to the organization?
So I'm going to pull you back just 1 second. Please. And before we get to the stuff abroad, I don't think people pay sufficient attention to the stuff at home. So for example, it's fantastic that there's a different government in Syria. We have issues with that government, but that is stopping weapons flows and money flows through the airport. They've arrested Hezbollah guys, etc. But Iran is still managing to get about the same amount of money that it was sending to Hezbollah before the war today.
How? Tell us how.
That's Shlav Bet, stage B. We're going to get there in a second. And it's just that it's not enough money today, given all the damage that the IDF did. And so that's their problem. Iran has been trying to pressure the Iraqis to formally allow them to use their airspace, and the Iraqis, based on significant U.S. pressure, have said no. As you mentioned, at one point they were sending money to Lebanon with people going on pilgrimages from Iraq. Then those Iraqi flights get full inspections. Then it was flights from Turkey. Those flights get. Now I'm hearing that it's not quite as many cases, but cases of people getting on flights from the UAE. That's still happening. But bottom line, it's money exchange houses and hawaladars. It's probably a dirty dozen. Some of them licensed in Lebanon, some of them unlicensed in Lebanon. And then to a lesser extent, there's some crypto involved, but it's still mostly the money exchange houses. On Al-Qard al-Hassan, which effectively is served as Hezbollah's bank, there's lots of good things to point to, and I think it cannot be overstated how important it is that the Banque de Liban, the central bank of Lebanon, I got to be careful what I say now because there's someone who walked in who knows what he's talking about, and who could tell stories about me if I don't behave myself. It's very significant that Banque de Liban issued a circular saying you cannot provide financial transactions for Al-Qard al-Hassan. But the central bank does not regulate Al-Qard al-Hassan because Al-Qard al-Hassan is registered as a charity. And moreover, one of the big things we're concerned about right now is Hezbollah's ability to make money within Lebanon, its own shadow banking, its own shadow economy, in particular right now real estate, And the real estate market, again, is not regulated in the same way, and Al-Qard al-Hassan is able to still function in the real estate market. So there's lots of ways Hezbollah can make money domestically in Lebanon through its own shadow economy and through the tentacles it still has into the government of Lebanon. Even things like having government money directed to this town and not that town, and then be able to go people say, by the way, I arranged for that. That's the best for them. It's not even spending their money. And then on top of that, now we can get to your question about outside.
Go ahead, please. So well, maybe I'll take a zoom out as well.
Good.
What we're hearing in DC and in the region is that let's say the severe hit that Hezbollah took, together with the change of government with Aoun now leading the government, creates and the Lebanese armed forces in a campaign of a sort to disarm whatever that means Hezbollah. There's, as you know, there's argument about what that means. The organization is it's under pressure. Maybe in more ways, yes, in other ways, maybe no. So, to me, the question is money flows. Mm-hmm. And I understand let's say the domestic, the sovereign. It's also a political party. There are ways to play with the budget. What I am interested is foreign exchange, right? How does money flow? How is money generated? And then how does money flow into the country? And then I have a follow-up question. You decide where to start. Who makes financial decisions today?
So I like to be the last person from Washington, D.C. who will actually tell you when he doesn't know. Okay? And anybody who answers that second question right now is, and this is a technical term, is bullshitting you. Okay? And it's because so many of the people that Udi and I and everybody else followed for all these years are no longer with us.
Right.
Okay? So trying to figure out, and it's actually a huge lift for all of the intelligence services. Like, it was in some ways easier before. We knew these guys, right? Now they're all gone. People 3-4 levels down by default and by necessity are being moved up. There's also a top-down issue, right? Naim Qassem is no Hassan Nasrallah. There's a joke I keep hearing here that if we successfully shrink Hezbollah's budget so much that they can't afford to pay Naim Qassem's salary, the Israeli government will be happy to pay it for him just so that he'll stay. So we don't know exactly. There are some key people who are still around, but a lot of this is very opaque in the moment. So there's a big lift going on here. But your focus on the international, especially the international illicit networks, is really, really important. And I'm going to make it very, very relevant to us here in Herzliya. Yesterday, so first, there's a huge overlap between Hezbollah's illicit financial and illicit procurement networks. Hezbollah tends to reach out to networks that have been successful in the past in one or both of those areas and ask them to do more. So when the Syrian civil war started, they went out to a bunch of their well-known illicit financial networks and said, we want specific weapons for our elite fighters in Syria. The stuff the Iranians provide us is good for the regular soldier, but they're like third-rate knockoffs of a Kalashnikov. We want M4s, we want AR-15s, et cetera. And so we started seeing this tremendous overlap between the finance and the proliferation networks. Yesterday in Germany, the German government formally indicted a Hezbollah operative who'd been arrested several weeks earlier, I think it was in July, and charged him on procuring drone components for Hezbollah in Germany, in Spain, components from the United States, from China, from all over the world. And in the announcement, they noted that at least 2 of the drone engines that he procured were delivered to Hezbollah and were used in attacks. One of the engines that he procured was in the drone that hit Herzliya 11 months ago on Yom Kippur at an old age home. No one was killed, thank God. But like, this is tangible, this is real. And it's not just drone components and whatnot. You have to, it's not a big leap of logic to understand that when Hezbollah is under financial stress, they are going to reach out to their financial facilitators around the world. Now is the time, right? And so while it's true, as I said earlier, that Hezbollah, we believe, is still getting about the same amount of money from Iran today as it was before. It's nowhere near enough for what they need to maintain their base, to rebuild things, and of course now they're competing at a whole different political level with a government that is, as you intimated, maybe not, you know, going on full disarmament, but is actually doing a lot. I'm actually very impressed, much more than I anticipated, especially south of the Litani. So there's an opportunity now, but I really think we have to recognize that Hezbollah has opportunities in its arsenal, both abroad and at home in Lebanon, to get by, maybe not to get rich, but to get by. And so we need to pick up the pace of our law enforcement efforts around the world. We need to redouble our efforts to make it more difficult for Iran to move that money. I think these exchange houses, again, licensed and unlicensed in Lebanon, are very, very important. And I think that the praiseworthy Banque de Liban action on Al-Qard al-Hassan, and by the way, some other entities that don't get as much attention, should be the very first, not the very last, of these types of actions.
And so thank you for this. I think it's you know, it really helps set the stage. I suspect that not everyone in the room has you know, the same level of knowledge, not only about the organization, but maybe also about how it finances itself. Because a part of the Financial Reports Project, we've kind of exchanged drafts on what percentage of the sources are coming from where. I think a part that I would appreciate you kind of explaining to the group is, how does the, let's say, the global logistics and not only self-procurement, but in general, how does that side of the business looks like? What's happening in South America and Central America and West Africa, exports, Europe, Gulf? How does that look like, and how does Hezbollah actually navigate that, if that's the correct terminology?
Michael, how much time do we have? Come on.
Probably
Look,
8 minutes.
Here's what I'll say, standing on one foot. Okay. One of the things that's most impressive about Hezbollah's international finance and procurement networks is that they are diffuse, right? And therefore they're agile. So you have people who are supporters of Hezbollah. Some of them might be members, not all of them. And they have set up in, not only, but largely in diaspora communities, and especially in free trade zones. Everybody talks about the tri-border area of South America, for example. It's only a conversation once the tri-border area becomes a free trade zone, right? And there's obvious reasons and benefits to operating a free trade zone. When, after 9/11, the U.S. put significant pressure on governments in South America to start doing more on terrorism in general, including on Hezbollah, key members of the Barakat clan, a major Hezbollah network in the area, all of a sudden...
Not near Barakat.
No.
Okay.
There's been enough protest on that already. Leave the poor guy alone. Start moving to Iquique, Chile. Why? Because it's also a free trade zone. And so, you know, it's almost like when something happens in Israel and suddenly Jewish donor networks around the world activate. It's not so much that they are activated; they activate, right? There's a connection. And so it's a similar thing here. There will be people in Hezbollah who will task people. We need this. There'll be even more people who will just step up because they want to support the group to which they hold allegiance. And that is happening. There's no question about that. To me, the big question is, how effective are we going to be in curtailing that? There has been, over the past 10 years, a huge effort to get governments around the world to designate Hezbollah as a terrorist group. And it's happened all over the world. There was another government in South America, just did it yesterday. That's great, but it can't be the first and then only step. It's only effective if the designation then gives you authorities, and then you act on those authorities and you start enforcing your ability to make it more difficult for a group like Hezbollah to do these things. But because so many countries have designated, there is that opportunity. So there's now a very strong diplomatic opportunity to get countries that have already done something to now operationalize on that. And even countries that are uncomfortable with the way the war is going or what have you, they don't want groups like Hezbollah doing these things within their borders. And so I think one of the big things we need to do is kind of keep this apolitical, right? You agree with what a particular administration is doing in this country or the United States or whatever or not, that's one thing. But we all agree, we're not letting people who engage in textbook terrorism procure weapons, raise funds, or do other things within our borders. That's got to be the continued baseline.
Final question before we wrap this up, and I know we've condensed a lot into a very short period of time. How can we, as a let's say as a community of before I get to superlatives, but just law-abiding people who care about, forget about the Western world, Israel, the U.S. You just want to live a good life, and you want illegal organization to be outlawed. You want terrorist organization to not be able to operate, et cetera, et cetera. How do we, as a community of people who are, let's say, within the counter-terror financing world, how can we do better? How can governments do better? How can we allocate, how can we capture attention and allocate resources towards that field?
It's an excellent question and a difficult one to answer, because at the end of the day, there are so many bad guys out there doing so many different things, and we have to prioritize. Okay. It used to be that the United States in particular would just throw resources at every problem. We'd throw money at problems, we'd throw full-time employees at problems. We're not doing that anymore. We're realizing that well over 20 years after 9/11, it's just not sustainable. And no one else was doing it in the first place. Everyone else was doing already what we're beginning to do, which is a level of risk analysis. And so how do I prioritize the limited resources I have? So this is not poking my finger in the U.S. government's eye when I say, look, Hezbollah and especially Hamas were a much lower priority before October 7th. To the United States government's credit, immediately they jumped up significantly. We have a ranking system. With that ranking system comes with priorities and resources, et cetera. That makes a lot of sense. But ideally, we want to be able to be proactive and not only responsive. So now, sitting where we are, 2 years into this, being able to see that Hezbollah is not giving up, watching Hamas, say that if they could, they'd like to do October 7th over and over. So we have a responsibility to do what we can to make that much more difficult. And it can't only be the low-hanging fruit. On the Hamas side, for example, I like to point out, people get very, very excited about the Hamas Investment Committee. It's actually very interesting. There are opportunities there because there are people, one guy based in Sudan who has tremendous assets in Europe. I am one of those people who's been pushing the Europeans on that particular guy because there's something there. But at the end of the day, these are not liquid assets. Okay, at the end of the day, the actual Hamas Finance Committee has provided very, very little to Hamas itself. I'm not saying ignore it, but low-hanging fruit, shiny objects, that's not what we want. So it's being proactive. And I think that think tanks like mine, organizations like ICT and Reichmann, academic institutions, groups like yours, CENTEF, we have a unique role, opportunity, and I'd say responsibility to kind of get this information out there. You started saying, not everybody is as much of a, Hezbollah finance junkie as maybe you and I are, but it's a fun place to be. Join the team. So we can't expect people to be aware and therefore be animated on this if that information is not out there. And unfortunately, not all the information that's out there is super. Right. And so to the extent that a group like CENTEF actually puts out these documents, like treating as if like a company, look, this is what it is. I don't need to tell you, you're doing it. This is why it's so important. A group like mine publishing in journals and in op-eds, specific facts and findings on things like how these groups are financing themselves so that the public can know. Let's be honest, government is often driven by what was in yesterday's op-ed or this morning's op-ed to help drive that conversation. That's important, but it's got to be carefully done research. And so I'm really thrilled to be able to be here and to participate in this with all of you.
Dr. Matt Levitt, thank you, sir.